there's this guy, because we're recording, I won't say his name, but there's a listener to our show that's fairly well versed in, how can I say this without giving his identity away? He's quite well versed in the science of sound, let's say. And I've been talking to him for like a year or so about, because we both started doing the Gateway experience at the same time.
Cool.
Yeah, the FLAC files of that got leaked online about a year or so ago. So I downloaded all of those, and he did it at the same time. And so we were sort of comparing notes and everything, because he's an audio guy. He started creating his own sort of binaural files, I suppose, like his own kind of attempts at a Gateway experience. Like he'd sort of taken notes from the original and figured out ways to improve it, essentially. And so we've been kind of, for the last 3 or 4 months, he's been sending me like audio files. I've been testing them out for him and sending him back the results. And generally it's like listening to a Merzbow record for 3 hours a lot of the time. You know, it's like it's not great. But the last one I did, the most recent version of it, the weirdest stuff happened. I don't know how many of you guys have ever done ketamine before.
Oh yeah, I have.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, then I have as well. I wasn't sure if I was going to get in trouble for that, but anyway, yeah. But so if you take too much ketamine, you get this thing where, I get this thing where it's almost like the background of the show. I just suddenly start seeing static and like the K-hole.
Well, I mean, are we talking about doing it nasally, or are we talking about doing it intramuscularly?
Oh, nasally.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So so that I always get this sort of like crazy static kind of, like, it's almost like being inside of a television that's been detuned. That's kind of the thing I always get. So this audio, all of a sudden that happened, and I was like, whoa, this is kind of strange. And then weirdly, this face appeared out of nowhere, like out of this static, and started talking to me and was trying to convince me it was Krishna. And I had this really bizarre experience, like a magical experience essentially from this, where I came out of this whole, I had this kind of strange back and forth with this thing pretending to be Krishna that looked a bit like a PlayStation 1 level graphic of a face. It was really bizarre. It was like kind of very vector looking and strange. Yeah. And by the time I came out of it, because I was doing the keto diet at the time, the idea of me eating meat was just insane. It was just impossible. It was like I'd been hypnotized into going. So I haven't been able to eat meat at all since. It's the strangest thing. It's like the idea of it makes me physically feel ill. And I've never had this kind of reaction from one of those style, kind of binaural audio files before. And it's like, I think we stumbled upon something.
Yeah, you might need to share that with me. That file.
It was the most bizarre, because there was a trend recently, wasn't there, where these audio files were being kind of peddled online as drugs. Do you remember that? There was.
Oh yeah,
one called like the Gates of Hades or something like that. I think it was one of them. But do you two ever play around with binaural or audio consciousness?
Oh, I've been
stuff?
For years. I've been playing with it. Yeah. And, it's weird. I had an experience on LSD like a long time ago, but I did like a large dose, we'll say, and I was put off eating meat for about 4 years.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was weird. But I think the Krishna thing, was my brain doing something, because I'd just been like a week or so before to the Barbican in London, and they had this show. It was like a sort of folklore performance of old Indian Sanskrit legends, and sort of like this kind of legend story thing over 2 different shows. And Krishna actually turns up at one point in there and sort of talks at some point about not consuming living things or whatever. But it didn't hit me that much, but it was bizarre. I mean, I used to be a vegetarian. So it might just be like it might drag some weird guilt up in me or something, and I wasn't a vegetarian anymore and manifested as this PlayStation 1 Krishna. But it was the strangest thing. It was like, it was the weirdest experience. I've never had I've had experiences with occult stuff, or magic stuff like that before, but not from just listening to an audio file. And that's kind of the cool part of it. We were talking about municipal magic last week, and like one of the things I'm also interested in is it feels like Crowley's sort of version of magic is kind of like the method feels really out of date now. Almost, it almost feels like a bunch of people need to come in and kind of create new methods, like quicker or easier methods, though you don't have to like learn an entire folklore or an entire Egyptian blah blah blah, sort of god names, god forms, all this kind of stuff to be able to access the kind of effects of the of magic. And I'm wondering if like things like the Monroe stuff felt like a bit like a sort of astral projection machine to me, whereas like rather than having to go through Crowley's version or the Golden Dawn's version or whoever's version, where you have to prepare yourself for ages and ages and ages, you can just listen to these audio tapes and get a really, really similar experience. And so I'm kind of interested in that as well, this kind of idea of automating magical practice a little bit, or kind of modernizing magical practice a little bit.
I think one of the things with that though is that a lot of that like the information in kind of the formalism is to restructure the brain, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a way of
it's an imprint.
I'm sorry, what's it?
I said it's an imprint. It's a way to imprint.
Yeah, and it's it erases the self and like what we think of as the self, and replaces it with a different kind of arrangement of the stuff in our mind stuff, so any kind of reworking would have to take that into account without, because you can there's two separate things going on there. There's like the software, and the hardware. And so like the binaural and all that's working with kind of like the actual like meat, right? Like it's actually like restructuring brainwaves and doing that kind of stuff. But then a lot of that overlay in the sort of mythotypal stuff is working with different elements to how that plays out when the meat is tweaked,
It's kind of like archetypes, isn't it? It's like with magic, you're using archetypes. That's kind of why chaos magic exists in a way, isn't it? Because they were like, well, we can change the archetypes essentially. It doesn't have to be.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's Giordano Bruno's Expulsion of the Triumphant Beast, where he takes kind of the way that astronomy had created a mnemonic system, and then Expulsion of the Triumphant Beast is about reprogramming that system by reinstalling meanings onto the pre-existent constellations and that, and then working down through that into kind of reworking the systems that, because I mean, like in like theurgy and that, you're creating that kind of like inner outer bridge between the two, and create kind of a communication with that. So I just think, like with the Monroe stuff, it seems like very technical. But Monroe's experiences with it, he was encountering entities that he didn't have any classification for. Mm-hmm. And he actually went and spent like decades creating that classification system. Like if you actually look at Monroe's work, like he has different layered levels of consciousness. Mm-hmm. He has different like states of beingness that he talks about, and he was going on these kind of journeys into his out-of-body experience using the binaural technology and the sound technology that they were developing, while at the same time kind of mapping that out. And other people were describing their experiences, and then that was all going into kind of like a mapping system. It gets pretty technical, like if you get into the Monroe system.
It's funny that it went so woo-woo after a while as well, though. If you look at their kind of current output, the Monroe Institute, a lot of it feels very kind of like the covers of their kind of audio files, or all the kind of things you'd see in New Age bookshops in the CD section kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, that's the amazing thing. Like Stephen Halpern, pioneering guy who kind of pioneered what is New Age music, right? And it was marketing. That was all it is. It's marketing, and a lot of the stuff that came out from the Monroe Institute, especially now when there's no charismatic head, Bob's gone. So like you've got to kind of keep the institution going. Institute of Noetic Science, they've teamed up with Gaia TV, so it's really just, it's marketing, and that's the niche that buys it. And that's how you can kind of sell the experience. Deepak Chopra is another example. Like if you look at his early stuff, it's a little bit more serious, and you can see it too, kind of the layers of it, because there's still people who you wouldn't think would take them seriously that do, and it's just an interesting thing where the front end of so much of this stuff is just New Age marketing, because that's the market. It's I forget what the technical term is, like it's not the spiritual services market, but there's, you know, like the health and well-being market or whatever.
Yeah.
And I mean,
that's what it's become. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, you guys know, like, those things then have like the layer of marketing agencies and marketers who come in who know what the look is and know what it is. So it all gets kind of flatlined. You know, I mean, you look at Radin's books, right? Like those are all aiming at a specific market and they're written towards that market. So there's the actual science behind it, but you know, how much of that percentage of whatever content is just pure marketing, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's yeah, it's I need to look a bit more into it, but I'm wondering if there must be other. It can't just be Monroe. There must be other kind of, I guess, attempts at kind of creating magical responses using technology rather than the more traditional.
Oh yeah, there was the whole brain machine movement in the late '80s, early '90s.
Yeah.
I played with that light pulsation stuff and sound stuff that, you know, in conjunction with light pulsation and color. Yeah, and that stuff, I had some pretty profound experiences on that, but like having, you know, done this now for a long time, whatever this is that we do, and recently I'm like in the 5th chapter of like writing a book about the background of how did the Ong's Hat project come together, what was the meta machine about, what was the thinking that led me to even do that, and it's a great exercise because I'm having to unpack things I haven't thought about in years. And what we were just talking about with the brain machines, it reminded me of me just thinking about that recently, as I'm explaining the whole process of telesmata in Magick, and in that process, when you start out as a young, you know, neophyte, you're doing rote repetition things that aren't really doing much for you, and you're starting to wonder, like, why am I doing this? This is stupid. And then at some point, when that becomes integrated into your thinking at the cellular level, when you don't have to think about it anymore, when you don't have to consciously think about it anymore, it becomes subconscious level. You're touching the subconscious, and you're in the subconscious, which means you're right at the doorway of touching the collective unconscious, which means you're within shouting distance of the archetypes, right? And so you start to notice that, like, oh, one day, what happened for me, like one day it clicked. Like as I was doing the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram was a great example. It's like, as I was doing that and I was holding my attention on the direction, and I was thinking about all the things you're supposed to be thinking about, that this is this direction, and this is the element of this direction, this is the angel of this direction. Like, there's all these things you keep in mind. And then when that goes away, when you're thinking about it subconsciously, then that's when it starts to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
like you have your first experience of like, oh shit, this stuff really works.
Oh yeah.
You have an experience, and you're like, oh, I'm not just playing around. I'm not like playing dress up. This is really something that's working, and it's having an effect in my mind. It's having an effect at a deeper level of my mind, and I'm starting to like see things and hear things and feel things. And then you realize, like, oh, this is why we do this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think that the binaural beat stuff, the Monroe stuff, like, it's kind of the same level. I don't think it's a shortcut. I think you can get to the effects a little quicker, because you don't have to, like you said, there's not a tradition, a gigantic deep tradition that you have to memorize, which really is what you're doing, is you're memorizing when you're doing ritual. And then when you don't have to like think about what you're doing anymore, that's when it starts working.
Yeah.
But everything up to that is getting to the point of it being muscle memory. That's what it is, really.
I always remember them saying with LBRP, you should learn it so you can literally do it in your sleep. And then I found out why that was, because you sort of end up needing to use it in your sleep.
Yeah.
a few times. Yeah, a few times. That was like, whoa, okay. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. But what about you, David? Have you had any kind of encounters with machines that can create magic? Or, you know,
I really enjoy the Monroe stuff. When they got released and you could just sort of download it, I quickly jumped on that, and it's an interesting thing. I definitely had some effects from it. able to enter. But again, I mean, it's very mechanical. That's a very mechanical process. I I really enjoy the psychotronic stuff. Being in Georgia, I'm about an hour away, maybe 2 hours away from where Dr. Hieronymus was. If you're familiar with the Hieronymus machine, the wishing machines, and that, he actually got patents on his psychotronic devices, and he was one of the first people to do that. And there's actually Kelly Instruments, which still produces radionic devices. They're based in the same Rabun County, which is actually where Deliverance was filmed. So Deliverance, the Deliverance area has kind of psychotronic hub to it. But I really enjoy that stuff because I like the, I mean, to me, it's all kind of like it is just a bridge. It's a bridge to something else, and I think you can think of those kind of connections. And when you get into the radionic stuff and the psychotronic stuff, where the machine becomes symbolic, I think that's a kind of neat place to be, kind of a fun place to play in. Mark Bacuzzi at Windbridge did some interesting stuff with doing actually some experiments with psychotronic devices and wishing machines and kind of tracking potential effects, which I thought was kind of fun.
Yeah.
I don't know. Living rurally, like my mind and machines like have just slowly like divested themselves. We're like just kind of hanging out in the woods and like vibing on that kind of thing. But definitely I love Dick Sutphin stuff, the self-hypnosis tracks that Dick Sutphin has. Those are really fun. I don't use them to any kind of like really helpful level other than just sort of enjoying them, instead of watching Netflix or something, put on a Dick Sutphin self-hypnosis track. Brad Steiger had a cool one that he did with generating a close encounter, where it's kind of a self-hypnosis thing that the whole kind of script of it is to generate the vision of a close encounter with a UFO, which I thought was kind of fun. At the time, he was doing a thing called the Starbirth Odyssey, which is another kind of like sort of like a Monroe product, but it's got less tracks than that. But it's a past life regression kind of off the shelf thing that Brett Steiger made. It's called the Starbirth Odyssey, but it doesn't have anything to do with like starseed stuff. It's more just kind of a past life thing. So yeah, mine. I'm more playful with it, I guess. I haven't really used it to any kind of.
I wonder if you have experience with magic and the occult, like I guess we all probably do. I wonder if that predisposes us to have effects with these kinds of devices. We're already kind of tuned into that kind of that experience a little bit, and I wonder if interacting with these methods is just like, I guess, more useful for somebody that's already done the work, as it were, than to someone. Do you see what I mean? Like,
oh yeah, absolutely. I think well, we've just been talking about this, like repetition gets you to a point where then you actually reach the point where you don't think about it consciously anymore, and that's when you start to have results, right? And I think that dealing with machines, and we'll just call these machines of any kind, dealing with mechanics to get you into a certain state there's nothing wrong with it. I'm not saying, like, I'm not a purist. I'm just saying that it's just another way of getting you into the state. And so you're just working the muscles in a different way, using different machines, but you're still getting to the state. And then the goal is not to keep using the machines to get to the state. The goal is to learn to get to the state without the machines, which I think ritual is the same thing. It's like I had this discussion with Hyatt one time when he was still alive, and I had left the Golden Dawn, and he asked me, he's like, I'm just curious why you decided to leave. And I said, I never entered the Golden Dawn with the intention of staying. This is not a career for me. It's like I needed to get some things out of it. I got them, and then I left, because the only thing beyond what you need, the things that you need, is bureaucracies, and who needs that, right? It's just the people that stay just stay to be part of the bureaucracy. It's like there's nothing anybody who stays in one of those orders for long periods of time have anything to teach me, because they've shown me already that they have nothing to teach me by staying there. It's like you move through it, you get what you need, you shoot off, and you go on to something else. And I think these mechanical things that we're talking about, like mind machines and ketamine and all this, the psychedelics, even to a certain stage, as long as you know. I still use psychedelics, but I use them much more sparingly and much more ceremonially now than I did when I was younger. And I don't feel like I need them to get to certain states all the time. It's just sometimes it's easier to take 5 grams of mushrooms than it is to like sit up for 3 days and not sleep, especially at my age.
I had the opportunity to have dinner with Carol De La Heron, who was the president of the Monroe Institute. She was
wow.
actually one of the folks who worked with Bob Monroe on kind of coordinating the experiments and that. And she was super interesting because the way she talked about out-of-body experiences was like you would talk about just, going to the store or something. I mean, she was, and it was to her, it was nothing, and it's exactly what you were saying. It's like using the technology helped her get to a point where she could do it spontaneously and didn't need the technology.
Right.
And it was really interesting to have that, where it wasn't even an exciting thing to her anymore. It was just like breathing. Like that's just how you do it. Like you know something, you out of body, walk through the wall, like see it, do whatever. Which was just a really interesting to sit there with her and to have her living in that reality. I was not in that reality yet, but it was really interesting. And she was talking about a thing called a Kozyrev Mirror. A researcher, it's a spiral mirror, kind of reflects her, that can enter things. I was really excited about the thing she was describing was an actual. It was like they had been experimenting with the Kozyrev mirrors, and then now they had some kind of like sphere that was perfectly reflective that you would sit inside. It was kind of like like one of those silence chambers as well. So it was like reflective inside. And so that people were having a hard time kind of adapting to that one. But those kind of things are really interesting to me. I have a dream of building a Kozyrev mirror.
I did something like that in the 80s. I discovered that there was mirrored plexiglass that you could buy. And so I turned a closet into a mirrored closet. So like the floor was mirrored, the ceiling was mirrored, the walls were mirrored, even the door when I shut it was mirrored. And I took a candle in with me and I sat and did about 500 or 600 micrograms of LSD and sat in that room when I did it. And I got to tell you, man, I had some experiences, some wild experiences.
Well,
I was like,
poof. One of my co-hosts occasionally, and he was a guest on my show, Ulysses Black. He, as part of his kind of magical kind of, he does like performance art, but he's also as into sorcery, and he's a proper magical practitioner, as you'd say. But he created what he called like a holy guardian angel machine, and it was the same thing where it was like this cabinet that you sat in. I can't remember, there was a name for it, like a Victorian name for that kind of cabinet, where you have like everything's mirrored.
Are you thinking of a psychomantium?
Yeah, psychomantium, that was it. Yeah, so he created a psychomantium, and this kind of, it was all part of his magical operation, and it kind of activated the Ulysses Black kind of persona and holy guardian angel thing, which he's still working with to this day. So yeah, mirrors can be powerful things when used in the right way.
I've been playing fly on the wall for a subculture on the internet. I don't even know if they call themselves anything. I call them shofar honkies, because they're like all these white middle-aged guys who are like a weird brand of Christianity, and they all carry shofars for some reason. They're not Jewish, but they love to blow their shofars. And I noticed they all like to ride Harley Davidsons. I did pick up on that because I kept looking at like, oh, is that guy wearing a Harley patch? What's going on there? So everybody's like into Harley Davidsons. Everybody like has a shofar, they're all infatuated with the Nephilim. They absolutely believe like those weird, stories about like the American soldiers in Afghanistan ran across the Nephilim in a cave and there was a battle, and they just like tell this stuff like, no, it really happened, dude, because the dude I know was in the unit, and I'm thinking, wow. I'm like, and then so I got interested in them again when I saw everything going down in the Middle East. I'm like, these guys got to be like going off the wall right now, and sure enough, they are. They're just like, this is it. This is the final. Here it is, man. The final battle in Megiddo. This is the one. Like they're fired up. So I'm just like sitting back and like like lurking on this and just watching these guys just completely batshit insane, as I figured people would. Anytime anything blows up in the Middle East, it's always like this is it, the battle we've been waiting for. And there's like this whole subculture of Christians, which they are a part of, which is hoping for Armageddon. Like they and so they're like they're telling these stories about these so-called genetically engineered red heifers that are perfect, that like are going to be the heifers that are like Dave knows. Like I throw this stuff at him on Facebook from time to time. But so like there's this whole weird panic culture that, well, it's not panic. It's what would you call it? It's ecstatic. They're so sure that Jeebus is coming back tomorrow, and they can do something to immanentize the eschaton. That's what they're doing, man. They're like, how do we make this? How do we get this to happen? Like, it's not like how do we avoid war? It's like, how can we make sure the war happens? And and it's a lot. It's more people than you would like to imagine.
Oh yeah.
It's like it's not in the hundreds. It's in the thousands of people that are sitting around talking about this.
The kind of influence of that culture too is deeply embedded in the military too.
Oh yeah. They're all ex-military. Everybody is.
Yeah. It's Jerry Boykin, who's I forget, was it a Delta Force or something? I don't know. He was over one of the special ops things, and he's deeply embedded in that culture. It's really disturbing, like the kind of prophecy, like prophetic Christianity culture. A lot of that third wave charismatic stuff, with the strategic spiritual warfare in that, like that's all intermixed in that, and it's one of the major proponents of that, Tom Horn, from Skywatch and Defender Publications. He actually passed away this past week. So they've lost one prophet has gone down.
But do prophets ever really go down?
No. He's still alive in his books about the beast. What we're talking about now is beast tech, or what we were talking about with the binaural beats and all that. That's beast tech. It's a tool, right, to lure us into demonic bondage. Yeah,
I've been hearing, and of course the one thing I kind of thought was going to happen years ago, and now I'm seeing it happen, is I'm seeing people that I would think would have no knowledge of the Collins Elite invoking the name Collins Elite now. Like these guys I'm talking about, I call them the shofar honkies. The shofar honkies are starting to use the term Collins Elite, which I was like, oh no, it's back, or it never went away.
Derek Gilbert, who, oh man, I think his podcast is called From the Bunker, but he's one of.
Oh yeah.
And he had Nick Redfern on like right away. They love Redfern stuff. Those guys can, I mean, at their most mediated, they quote Keel and Valet and all the rest of it. They're better read than a lot of people who write about this stuff on a secular or believer level. They're definitely more well informed than the academics that are looking at it. These guys, they know their history. It's pretty disturbing. Although I have to say that, I mean, I've always found that, if you read their books because they are so well read and because they have such an obvious bias and focus, it actually is kind of a helpful, they dig deep and they want to get the dirt. There's things about Eileen Garrett that I didn't know until I read their stuff. about her mediumship and some of the more like interesting aspects of it, which the parapsychologists try to sweep under the rug because they're weird, and these guys and try to pull it out because it's weird.
So yeah, that it's been an exercise in tunnels, reality tunnels, because I'll spend like a couple hours in this environment, and then I have to pull my head out and go do something sane, because it's just like it's like you get the bends if you come up too quick, man. It's like really deep, weird shit, and they're absolutely unlike a lot of there's people you can see doing that, and you kind of like, I think you're grifting, But like when you listen to these guys, you know that they are absolutely sincere.
Yeah.
They really, really believe this thing, and so that makes it more, to me, scary. I'm like, yeah, like you were saying, Dave. These are all like people that are either. Most of the people that I watch or listen to are like ex-military, but they all have their fingers still in active military people. So like there's like it's very predominant. It's more predominant than I would have thought. And so it's a lot of people with a lot of guns or access to a lot of guns, which, I'm not anti-gun. I have guns myself, but it's kind of I'm questioning, because there was this period of time, like around 2014, 15, 16, when there was a rise of the alt-right, as they called themselves then. And then there was like during the Trump years, and then they started to drop off, or they seemed to, but I don't think they did. I just think they're not as public now. I think they got wise to the fact that being too public is not good for them. It's the optics are bad.
Yeah.
And
on the
Scientology did that too.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and on the Christian kind of this charismatic wave, kind of, they come and go. I mean, that was one of the things I was tracking with the exorcism books in Walmart, right? Like, there was a period in time where they had those in there, and they were, like bold-faced, like how to dispel demons and stuff like that.
Right.
Raw, like in-your-face kind of exorcism stuff, and then that sort of drifted away, depending on what the message was needed in the next 3 years or so. I mean, that's the thing, is like, this isn't like podunk like yokel stuff. Like, a lot of the mediated end of it is really well coordinated and really smart. Billy Graham was doing demographic profiling with prayer cards back in like the 50s, like late 40s, like early 50s. They were already like tracking demographic movements and how to manipulate those using prayer cards. So if you think of that like level of like coordination and like the ability to see trends and to jump on trends and immediately have a book, they're not afraid to use ghostwriters. They're not afraid to use, the Skywatch people, which Jared Gilbert is associated with, and Jerry Boykin, and that they've got a massive publishing thing, and they publish kind of like pulpy, like weird stuff. But then, like, that's just one layer of it. And then there's multiple layers. I mean, they're connected to the people who are prophesying Trump, and that. It's pretty crazy when you look at, like, just the kind of the media behind this stuff and, like, the planning behind it,
Well, the one of the sectors that represents the most money spent in television, video equipment, broadcasting. I discovered all this when I started a DVD company in '99. That I had to learn all about these markets, like, because we were dealing with people that were, dealing with broadcasting. And I did not know this, but like the number one market represented by all of that equipment and all of those methods is
religion.
Evangelicals, religion.
Mm-hmm.
It's the biggest market.
Yep.
Followed by porn. The amount of money that religion controls in media, especially broadcast media, but now internet media as well, is just, they don't talk. You don't learn that in school. Like, nobody talks about it. But like when you actually get in the business, which I've done over the years, you have to start, doing market research for this stuff. You're like, who am I selling to? Who's available to sell to? Who's probably going to want to buy this? Therefore, what is the feature set that's probably going to appeal to them? And it just really is about religion. It's like more, just overshadows even Hollywood. It blows Hollywood away, the amount of money. And it's all like this weird grassroots stuff. Yeah.
And that was what drew my attention with the Walmart exorcism books, was because if it's in Walmart, it's passed through so many layers of being vetted for being profitable.
Yeah.
A lot of the kind of, I don't know, news or, like a sort of news reporting on Walmart, why they sold Bibles and why they sold that stuff. It was all kind of focused on like, oh, well, the founders had religious values in that. But if you actually look at why they sold Bibles, it was because they sold.
Yeah.
They put them in and they sold like hotcakes. And so they kept them in. And then they went and expanded it to the Rick Warren stuff and the feel good kind of like inspirational stuff. And there's also there's a specific distributor that has mapped the market, and they put like a little kiosk. They're called like I forget the name of the company, but they're basically the distributor for these different Christian publishers, and they get the kiosk in in the store, and you see them in grocery stores. They distribute to Walmart and that. And again, it's just money. I mean, it seriously is. It comes down to just a ton of money. And if you think about how much does that real estate cost in Walmart, right? Like, how much is that worth to have your book sitting there? And then you look at what books are there. That shows that though that's what's selling. That's what's actually moving on the market, and in order to kind of shift that, you're putting it right up next to food, you know what I mean? So like flavored brand things that, are necessities. And then you have these books, right? And so that really shows that there is a significant, market there for that kind of stuff. And for some of it to be exorcism and spiritual warfare material, it shows that that's actually way more prevalent in the market space than, I think, kind of the news media and the sort of secular vision for our world as being disenchanted.
So why, because in the past, like my view of America, I would say like in the 80s, 90s, was the evangelical movement was very say it loud, say it proud. It was very much, an outsider. We were talking about this with Christina Ward on our on one of our shows recently, but it's very much the international perspective of America was that it was a very evangelical country at one point. It was because you had tons and tons of channels of television, which you still do, of evangelical stuff. But what happened? Why did they suddenly dial it back publicly? Because that's the thing that's really interesting to me. Now I don't see that anymore. I see a little bit of it, but it seems like the outlier rather than the predominant thing. But is it like a tactic or something? I don't quite understand.
Well, I think there's the carousel effect of like, the trend of the day. The American culture is really about like, well, something's trendy for a while, and then you have to hate it and tear it down and move on to the next thing, which doesn't mean that thing goes away. It just means that the media is no longer focusing on that thing, because that's what I was saying is like, you would think that the whole evangelical thing had died off, but it really hasn't. Maybe it's gotten bigger in a lot of ways. Like the numbers, I think, are reflecting that it's getting bigger, just overall.
And it's kind of it's become like in the U.S. like U.S. culture eats itself. So it sort of trends, and then you see it in this big way, and then it sort of just becomes part of the air you breathe in the United States.
Yep.
A lot of this stuff has just become, it just saturates into the culture. And that's one of the things that I find interesting about tracking the Collins Elite stuff, because here was a book put out by, Nick Redfern. He writes this book, kind of simmers. It sort of percolates in these kind of fringe areas. And now it's being mentioned in major news stories about the UFO thing, and it's repeated by people, and they don't even think of where it came from or what the province of that was, So it's it's really weird in the U.S. to see that like happening. And the other thing, it trends based on which political party is in the White House. So like when you have Republican Party in the White House, you get a lot more kind of open evangelical sort of news, and then when Democrats in the White House, you get more science news or something, or geopolitics and stuff. But because I mean, as soon as Trump was out, that whole conversation sort of went silent, and that it's not really like silent, because it was so loud. So yeah, it's just a weird sort of tick of our bipartisan politics and culture, which just enjoys sort of eating itself.
Well, the media also has this, they look for novelty cycles. So they find something, they spin it until you just can't stand to hear it anymore, and then they move on to the next thing, which doesn't mean that thing has gone away in the mainstream. Like, people are still maybe practicing or thinking about this or participating in this thing that used to be a focus of the media, but the media has to find the next new novelty thing to focus on. So it feels to us like it went away. The thing that was being focused on is no longer, popular. And to some extent, that's true, but to a large extent, it's not true, because it just means the media has stopped focusing on it, which doesn't mean it went away.
Yeah,
it does, like that's what I'm saying. When these things start happening, like when you see Israel going to war and like all these things happening, I start watching some of these groups because I want to see like how many people are showing up. Are they growing in number? What are they saying? What are they talking about doing? What are they focusing on? Because I just have a weird, morbid sense of curiosity about these things.
I did the exact same with COVID. When the COVID started, I immediately went to Alex Jones's, what's it called, band.videos and David Icke's forum and all this kind of stuff, because I wanted to see, I wanted to see how the narrative built, how they, and you could watch it. It happened over about a month, a period of a month. You could see the legend kind of becoming a reality, and it's still happening. It was all 5G. Originally, it was 5Gs connected to COVID. That was Ike's kind of perspective on it, and then Alex Jones's was more of a kind of, this is just an excuse to take our guns, that kind of thing, and the usual Alex Jones stuff. But it's interesting watching how these kind of theories build and how they morph, and then how they kind of crystallize universally. That's the weird thing that's really interesting. You saw all these different conspiracy theorists picking up different kind of theories and sort of going, oh, this is it, no, this is it. And then eventually they all kind of came to a kind of consensus on it. And that was really interesting to watch. And I that didn't used to happen, really. I mean, it happened a bit with 9/11, but generally, conspiracy theorists would always be slightly at odds with each other. And that would be the kind of, you'd have your favorite conspiracy theorist that you go to. You'd have
right.
Yeah. Alex Jones for your kind of evangelical side. David Icke would be your more kind of new agey, right. Kind of guy. Then you'd have like weird occult ones like Freeman and blah blah blah. So you'd kind of pick your favorite conspiracy theorist, and that would be who you sort of, it's a bit like choosing a political party, isn't it? You sort of, that's where you you place your stick in the sand kind of thing. But more recent, and I'm wondering if it's because of like, they've seen the popularity of things like QAnon, maybe, where that was kind of like a digest of conspiracy theories, wasn't it? Over, or like a kind of, I don't know, like an aggregate of conspiracy theorists. So that built up into one giant conspiracy theory. And I wonder if they're kind of these kind of disparate conspiracy theorists have seen the popularity of and how effective that was, and maybe there's this part of me that thinks there's a conspiracy of the conspiracy theorists, that they're actually all talking behind the scenes and going, right, this is what we need to. It's like the Council of Nicaea almost. They kind of got together and kind of.
Well, yeah, I mean that sounds a little paranoid and conspiratorial, but having been in what was referred to as the guru circuit back when I first started doing the Incunabulous CD-ROM, which songs had, and people were carrying it, was like David Icke had it in his catalog. I didn't ask him to, but he did. He had it in his catalog, and other people were distributing it, and so I did do some. I went on a tour, and I did appearances at some New Age bookstores and on radio stations and stuff. And I was running into a lot of people that were like, oh, we're fans of David Icke and we like your thing too. And it was like, so you started to talk to these people, and they do share all these. They do share information with each other. Like there is this backroom conversation. Now it's not necessarily conspiratorial. Like they're not sitting around going, which conspiracy theory can we integrate today? You know, but yet
Well,
they do.
it's like marketing.
But they do. But they do. Yeah.
Yeah.
The carney circuit. I mean, it's a carney circuit, right?
It's absolutely what it's like. Yeah.
You go back to Donald Kehoe talking to Ruppelt about talks and how much you can get paid for a talk, right? Like Donald Kehoe writing about UFOs. Ruppelt comes out of Project Blue Book. He wants to know, like, you know, is it worth it for me to be pitching this book and to be promoting this book? And Kehoe's, the entire letters written about how much you can get, where to go for a good talk, like what town it pays you the most, like, you know. And so it's not to say that they were disingenuous about their research, but once you get into the media version of it, you're a performer. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
People are performers. Yep. And performers, you know, like, where's the best club? Like, how much am I going to get paid here? Do they rip you off? Like, and then what's selling, right? Like, what's selling right now? Like, what's hot?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and that's the thing, like with the evangelical and charismatic stuff, is that they're so market oriented, right? Because the very idea of the Great Commission is a sales job. It's you're selling the evangelical vision or the charismatic vision or the fundamentalist vision to an audience, you know, to a market. And so, you know, they really track what is trending, what is that. And the same thing with conspiracy people. Like, if you're an Alex Jones, your entire paycheck requires you to say things that people are interested in and want to hear. And if David Icke is scooping up the reptilian portion of your market, you know, you're going to have to figure out a good spin to put on reptilians that fits within your narrative that you've spun, so that you're not, I mean, it's, you know, it's storytelling, and it's the age-old sideshow hustle kind of thing, you know, like what freak is the freak of the week kind of thing. Well,
I mean, what is the terminology that's used? This says it all. When in marketing, what is the terminology that's used when you've done the thing you set out to do? You have made a conversion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. When you've turned somebody's interest into a sale, a click into a sale, you have made a conversion, and that is exactly. It maps exactly to the fundamentalist, you know, evangelical thing. They're out to make conversions. That's what they're trying to do. And so the great thing about if you're working for the church, it's a 2-for-1. You know, you get a soul and some dollars.
with no taxes, you know.
And no taxes on this, at least. Yeah, like either one, because you're a church. So yeah. Tax free.
Yeah. You get,
well, that's the funny thing. Like Skywatch, they sell these packages of the Defender Publications books, but it's all for donations, right? Like, so it's a donation of $33.99 that gets you, you know, XYZ thing, and they do these. I love the business end of it. Like, you know, it's so amazing to me, like just how it's so stripped down, you know, but it's like it's beautifully stripped down, because like they sell these, you know, Wiser Antiquarian, right? Like Wiser Antiquarian made their publishing company off of taking books that were out of print or that were in questionable copyright because they were published in the UK or whatever, you know, DeLawrence, right? L.W. DeLawrence and the famous catalog, the DeLawrence catalog. Same thing. Money was made off of taking questionable copyrights, you know, and that now we have a whole slew of out of copyright material, right? And what is a good portion of that from the 1800s? It's Christian, and it's not written far enough back that there's any kind of, you know, there's not much editing and washing that needs to happen to the book to publish it. If you get something from the 1700s or something like that, or 1800s, you know, like that's, you got to kind of clean up the language for people to read. But the stuff from the 1800s, it's out of copyright. Don't need to clean up the language. You just slap a new cover on it, right? Skywatch in particular is really great at making just these what's been called Christian grindhouse covers, right? Like, I mean, they do insane Photoshop mashups of like dragons and fire and Satan coming up, and the titles are nuts, you know, and like, but then in the center of it is just some republished out of copyright book from the 1800s, you know, and it's an amazing model, and it's a simple model. And it's a model that has been used again and again and again. And it just so happens that this stuff is just really spicy. You know, I mean, this is a really really tasty little product that they can put out there.
It's happening with Crowley now, because Crowley's out of copyright now. It's in England, especially. Maybe not in the States, but in Europe and England and everywhere else, he's out of copyright. So you're seeing these non-wiser kind of Crowley books starting to appear now. Yeah. Like Stephen Skinner just did a version of the big book, the book 4. Yeah. And yeah, it's bizarre, but suddenly seeing these long out of print Crowley books suddenly reappearing, and and these kind of little publishing houses making, I imagine, quite a lot of money, just basically putting out old material.
Craft is out of copyright, so that's why you see so many things, and that's Poe, right? Like the Corman movies, the AIP Corman Poe movies were done specifically because Poe was out of copyright and was a recognizable product, and it had provenance, right? So like the idea was that Poe was classy enough, but then had the material that you could twist into an exploitation movie, but it was classy enough that it could hit a mid-market, and that they were designed to hit mid-market. And so they took a classy, out of copyright, but with enough give room to also fit the exploitation, and then put that out, you know. And so like Crowley is a great example. Winnie the Pooh, that Blood and Honey movie that just came out, right? Winnie the Pooh's copyright ended, so somebody made a horror movie off of it, you know. It's a really easy model to do. And then it just gets weird when it enters the political and the geopolitical realm and kind of the ideological realm, where you're using those mechanisms, but then the information that's being spread is a little bit more virulent. You know?
What was the Skywatch publishing house called?
Defender Publications.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I rebought Final Events after our last conversation, because I've got a really tatty copy of it, but I thought, I'll buy it because it's, it's still a bit of a pulp classic these days. So, and it was fairly affordable on Amazon in hardback. So I thought, I'll get the hardback. And it came with it's almost like old school. It had like a little catalog with it, and it was Defender Publishing. So I'd bought it direct. I'd bought it directly from them.
Beautiful.
So this kind of almost proves our point a little bit. I was like, I was looking at it thinking that these titles all seem quite Christian. that there's like the demon UFO. There's something else. There's a whole bunch of like books I'd not actually heard of before. But
oh, of course, yeah, no, and that's the Christian grindhouse. Like just look at those covers. I've got a whole. Actually, I wrote to so George Hansen. I know Joe is familiar with George Hansen's work. I don't know, Ken, if you are. He wrote a book called Trickster and the Paranormal, and he was involved in a lot of the parapsychological labs in the 80s. But George is he's an interesting researcher. But he sent me a note one time, and he was like, "Yeah, these Christian guys have." They were interviewing me a whole bunch, and I'm in one of their books, and I was like, "Oh, what is this? Like, that's weird. Like, I'm really interested. What is this book?" And it was called Supernatural Worldview. And what one of the guys from Defender Publications had done was he had gone to the Rhine Research Center and had taken courses there. And then, if you do that, like anybody can do it. You sign up for their online courses and you take the course in parapsychology. But when it was framed the way he framed it, it was like he became a parapsychologist. Like he had like a university and gotten a degree in parapsychology, which you do get at parapsychology from the Rhine, but it's not, it's a certification, that the Rhine is. Yeah. This isn't something that you can like take and like, and use for your job or something. So it was really interesting to see the way he framed that. And then they liked George's work because George focuses on kind of the negative aspects of psychic experiences. And so they really kind of clamped onto that. And so I wrote to them, though, because I wasn't going to spend money on this book. I wanted to see it, but I was like, could I get a review copy? And they sent me the same thing, like a catalog and a box of books, because it was like, they sell it as a ministry. So they've got it. The more copies they get out, the more.
Oh, yeah.
So they were like, yeah, here you go. You want Supernatural Worldview? We got these 2 other ones, and we got a back stock of this. We're going to stick some of that in there too. So I got a little like care package from Defender, which was it was an awesome experience. I always kind of wanted to model like like a weirdo version of that, just sending weird crap, just like like a weirdo ministry, like here's some books that you should send a donation and get a box full of weird crap.
We've been working on behind the scenes on a kind of video. Well, it started off as just a one-off video for the channel for Sitting Now. Have you guys ever heard of Clapham Woods in England before?
No.
Okay, right. So Clapham Woods in the 80s, a book came out called The Demonic Connection, and it's it's an interesting book. It's by a guy called Toyne Newton, who's now become like a big conspiracy kind of I don't know, like I don't know what kind of conspiracy theory. I don't know which area he falls under really, but he thinks like the EU is a Satanist plot, that kind of thing. And him and another guy called Charles Walker, and this Charles Walker guy apparently back in the 80s, a load of basically Clapham Woods is near me. It's in Sussex down the road, and like for a few years, people kept going missing. Like local vicar went missing, a policeman went missing, and then their bodies would turn up years or so, 3 years later in the case of the vicar. It's been large. I mean, Andrew Collins jumped on it. It was like this big sort of thing at the time. There's this Demonic Connection book comes out. And Andrew Collins writes a book called The Black Alchemist, which is quite a famous book. And that kind of covers the Clapham Woods stuff as well. But it seemed to have been all kind of disproved. And the original guy that had written the sort of story, basically this original guy, Charles Walker, claimed that he was contacted by an occult group that lived in the woods or were based in the woods called the Friends of Hecate. And so the Friends of Hecate, that became it's a huge myth now in England. Like everyone, there's still people that believe the Friends of Hecate are real, and there's whatever. That's not really the interesting part. I thought, oh, well, that's kind of an interesting thing for us to cover because it's just down the road. But then I sort of shelved it for a while. I didn't really kind of cover it until a listener kind of got in contact and said, well, I've just been to Clapham Woods and checked this out, and sent me a load of photographs, and there's like all this occult stuff all over the place. Like, sigils on the floor, Babylon sigil on the floor. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. Let's just go and film that and see, just sort of go and catalogue it kind of thing. So he kind of gave us the location of where it was. And then, so I go there. I just went on my own and just filmed a bunch of it. And then, yeah, I need to be careful how much I say here because it could get me in a bit of trouble. Right, so there's... so I turned up and there are all these sigils everywhere. The listener didn't recognise a few of the sigils, and it turns out that 3 of the sigils are Order of 9 Angles, which is why I was kind of mentioning them in this episode a little bit. Yeah, so I'm thinking, okay, that's interesting. So we might have some actual juicy stuff going on here. So I went into the town afterwards just to go to the pub just to get like a Diet Coke or whatever, so I could just have something to do. And I started talking to the barman, and he said, oh, you need to talk to this guy. And it turns out there's a group that the whole town seems to know about called, which I've never heard of before. And I was like, oh, okay, this is getting juicy now. But it's really interesting. I've never really looked into the Order of 9 Angles before, but I don't know how much you've actually looked into, because they're actually a bit more interesting.
I've looked into it a lot.
Yeah, they're a lot more interesting than I realised. I thought they were just like a skin for a like a paramilitary kind of Nazi thing, but they're a lot more than that. You kind of, when you sort of look at these groups, you have to kind of, the way I look at them anyway, whenever a new one pops up or when I'm suddenly interested in it, I sort of go through like a bullshit process. Like, okay, what is this really? Oh, it's just a spin-off of Theosophy. Okay, blah, blah, whatever. Oh, it's just like a sort of, it's an OTO group that got disenfranchised and started their own thing, whatever. But this group seems to be almost entirely original with their kind of occult thinking in many ways. Like this whole sinister idea, it's kind of some of it comes from like Odinistic practices, but a lot of it is from this guy Anton Long, the guy that kind of allegedly started the order, who is actually most likely this guy called David Myatt. But have you actually ever read any of David Myatt's writings? His
I have.
Writings? Yeah.
I took a deep dive into the O9A about 8 or 9 years ago because I ran across some people in the ambient metal scene, Cascadian metal scene specifically. So up around here, because I was coming up here and hanging out and there's like this. They're still around. There's a group up here that does these ambient metal shows in the forest, and so there's like Fauna and like Wolves in the Throne Room, and like there's like all these groups that are very predominant in that scene, and a lot of people in that scene kind of like adopted at least the like outwardly like claim to be part of O9A or to be an O9A. Like what are they called? Not a pylon. That's the Temple of Set.
What is it?
They have a word for like So basically,
like a cell, isn't it? It's kind of
yeah. I can't remember, but it's basically it's like the set people have the Temple of Set people have a pylon. So it's like a subgroup of the group. And most of those people that when I kind of like backed them in a corner and talked to them, they admitted to me that it was just an aesthetic they adopted to be kind of like off-putting and scary, So I was like, yeah, well, okay, I remember those days, like like
what the kids call edgelords these days, I believe.
Edgelords, exactly. Yeah. And if you like really queried them, like they didn't even really know the mythos that much, like but. In looking into all that, just because I got interested in it, the mythology and the mechanics of this thing are very, very complicated. Like somebody who put it together really knew what the fuck they were doing.
Oh yeah.
And Myatt claims, who Anton Long claims that this was all learned from a group of people that he met in England who go way back, who don't have a name, blah 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 blah. Which if I was building a myth, that's how you do it. Like You have
it's the Golden Dawn myth, isn't it? It's like
yeah. It's the secret chiefs. It's the whole thing. But the main thing is that like in doing so, I started looking at who Myatt was and what he was doing, and he's even since then like come out and publicly admitted that this was something he picked up and kind of like adopted to use he tried to use it as a marketing tool to bring in new people to his, basically Nazi viewpoint. He was trying to recruit. He was using it as a recruiting tool, and he said that he stopped doing it because the people that you recruit to the occult are some of the stupidest, most worthless people you could ever want to recruit into a political movement, which is funny. But Myatt is interesting because he's really, really, really smart.
Yeah, that's the one thing about him.
Yeah, and he keeps changing. Like for a while, he became a radical Muslim.
Yeah,
and then now he's like on some kind of new age kick. It's like every time you turn around, he's changing. Which, if you know anything about the O9A, that's a thing they do. Mm-hmm. Like you're supposed to adopt and adapt different viewpoints and live that for a while.
Yeah, it's called like an insight role, I think they call it.
It's an insight role, exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at it, I'm going, well, you're doing what you're telling people that you're doing the insight role thing. Mm-hmm. And there are people here in the United States that have picked up O9A, and like Adam Wathan was one of them. Mm-hmm. Those people have been put in jail. There was a
Martinet Press is one of them. Do you know?
Yep.
That whole stuff, that was an insane rabbit hole I went down.
And that guy actually turned out to be an FBI informant.
Yeah,
the guy that ran that. Yeah. So it's like it's nothing I want to get involved with from an occult perspective, but from perspective of somebody like me who likes to be a fly in the wall and watches all this stuff go down, it was very interesting. Like mm-hmm. there was a girl who was like Chloe Ortega, I think her name was.
Yeah.
Who was like, she was recruiting out of Los Angeles. She was a gang person out of LA, a Latin American gang person, which I found interesting. It's funny how they they'll adopt and adapt. Like if like black people want to join, well, that's okay. We can have the black pylon or whatever. It's like it's really strange. And so I'm like looking at all this and I'm thinking, yeah, there's probably a whole lot of FBI involvement in this stuff because this just looks like a honeypot. It's just a big giant honeypot.
They were trying to classify them as a terrorist group recently in the
they
US.
did classify them. Yeah, they did.
They actually did they in the US?
Yeah.
I don't think they have in the UK yet, but it's fascinating stuff though. I'm not in any way saying you should check out David Myatt necessarily. I'm literally just checking it out for, I guess, for research, morbid curiosity and research purposes. But he's a fascinating character. I mean, like he was a member of something called Combat 18 here in the UK.
Yep.
Which is they were, and he was he claimed he was inspiration for the Brixton nail bomber and all this kind of stuff. And
he was.
Yeah, and
well, I mean, the nail bomber actually admitted that he took that as his inspiration.
Yeah, but the actual magical side of it is what I've been looking at, because I think when most people they'll get to a certain level of it and they'll go, oh, Nazis, okay, but I kind of I like to sort of look beneath the surface a bit, and I've been trying to sort of actually read some of Myatt's stuff. And have you ever heard of this thing called the Star Game before?
Yep.
That's some crazy shit.
I actually played around with it. It's an amazingly complicated game.
Yeah, it's on like multiple levels, isn't it? It's like this kind of it's like chess on multiple levels, and it has like
that's why I said Myatt's not a stupid person. He's like really, really, really smart. And so this you kind of need a mathematical mind to play that game. Mm-hmm. Like you can't be a dullard. And that's why I said when he was trying to use this as a recruiting tool, the people he was getting was like, oh God, where did those people come from? Yeah. I'm like, dude, you're getting the teenagers that go to the graveyards on the weekend and try to summon Satan using the Avon the Necronomicon, so what do you expect?
Yeah. But it's kind of interesting, like you either, when you look at try and research a group like that, you either end up with kind of people that are vehemently against them, like or highly suspicious of them. There's a really good researcher here in the UK, or journalist here in the UK, Jake Hanrahan. He used to work for Vice, and he's done stuff I think for the BBC and stuff like that. But he runs a podcast and a thing called Popular Front now, and kind of covers a lot of war stuff. But he was one of the people responsible for exposing, well, at least linking Order of Nine Angles to Atomwaffen and Division, and he's a proper journalist, as they say. But and then on the other side, you sort of get like you say, like the kind of black metal kind of edgelord types. But then every now and then you'll find some people that seem to be at first appear to be neutral. But I'm now highly suspicious of all of them. But there's a particular one on YouTube called Interzone that I've been looking at, and he's this kind of alleged Australian. He's an occultist. He did a whole series of videos on is Chris Chan possessed by a demon. He sort of goes through this whole lore and looks at like Chris Chan. You know Chris Chan, obviously. So basically, he actually makes a case that there's some kind of demonic possession going on, and that Chris Chan had kind of unintentionally perhaps called in a demon into him and blah blah blah. So he did this whole series. It didn't do massively well, but I watched some of it, and it's interesting. But he's really started to make more of a name for himself on YouTube, covering the Order of Nine Angles to a point where I genuinely I'm no longer sure if he's a member or not of the Order of Nine Angles, because he did an interview with David Myatt recently, and if you read the questions that he gives him and the way he interacts with him in this kind of conversation he's having with Myatt, it doesn't seem like a neutral journalist kind of question. It's like, yes, no, I totally agree with you. He's almost calling him like a genius and all this kind of stuff. And he's clearly,
unfortunately, he kind of is, but
yeah. But he seems a bit too fond of him for my liking. So it's kind of like there's like, I don't know. It's a fascinating group, but the worrying thing is that this kind of video we've started making is now kind of come up against what appears to be some sort of, at least like a copycat or something of the Order of Nine Angles. I'm not quite sure what it is yet. I'm still trying to figure that out, but it is worrying when you kind of you come up against these groups, because like they're the kind of.
Well, if you study the history of the O9A, you'll see that it itself has like changed over the years, and Myatt, of course, has like said, "Well, wash my hands of this. I'm not doing this anymore," which I think is bullshit, honestly. But he's doing his inside roles, so he's doing something else now. And then he brought in like this Chloe Ortega, who some people have told me that she is a real person, and it's a real woman who's, I think, Mexican American or Puerto Rican American, I think they said. And then other people just said she's not real; she's another Myatt character online. Just like, what was it? Anton Long, Christian Bistos. There's like, he has like 14 names. He's like a troll. He has like all these names online. But there was an academic book written about this. God, I wish I could remember the name of it. I'll find it for you. Somebody actually did it. You ever read that deep dive that somebody did on the Process Church back in the day?
Oh yeah, ages ago. Yeah.
So somebody did one on the Order of the Nine Angles. I'll send it to you. It was very interesting because there seems to be a hint that all of this is based on some sort of dark pagan thing that you said. It's like it kind of smells like it came out of the Odin tradition. But then people like Myatt got their hands on it and of course turned it into this other thing. So they kind of updated it with like the star game and all these things they added to it, the insight rolls. I mean, the insight roll thing, it's pretty funny. When I first discovered all this, I was doing this thing where I took like 8 months and lived in the woods and just like built my own shelter, did the whole thing. Like I wanted to see if I could do it, and I did it. And then I come out and I start reading this stuff, and I discovered that's what the Order of the Nine Angles says you're supposed to do as your self-initiation. Is like take nothing but a knife and a tarp and go live in the woods. I'm like, hey, wait a minute. That's not a bad thing. Don't make that a bad thing.
Yeah, it's annoying. It's like, but the thing that's interesting me is that there does seem to be some genuine like magic in there, some genuine.
No, there is. That's, yeah. And all the kind of the digging I did on it, that it definitely has roots in something, which I think it's just like something old that came out of the woods. But then people like Myatt got their hands on it, and they probably like legitimately studied it. I really think he claims that he learned it from some old woman in the woods. Which it's a great legend. It's a great mythos to have, but it could genuinely be that he learned something from somebody,
He created the Star game when he was in prison, apparently.
Yeah.
Because he was, I guess for the Combat 18 stuff, he was in prison in the UK. I think he lives in Australia now. He's a sort of fascinating chap. Like there's something about him that's just fascinating. I don't sort of like him at all, but I find him fascinating. I find his mind fascinating.
You know what he has? He has the odor of like a gladio op of some sort.
Or a Vola, right? He's got like an Evola sort of thing about him. Like,
well, he's got an Evola thing, but I mean, what I'm saying is like he's got the veneer, the feeling of like somebody who's got his foot in both worlds, and he's probably like the dude from Martinet Press was outed as an FBI informant. I think Myatt is one of those too. I think he's one of those people that seems to like walk between the worlds. And somehow he's got his foot in intel fields. You know what I mean? He's involved with like some intel group or groups, and I don't know if it's necessarily American. I think it's probably British.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's dark and fascinating. The other thing that was interesting was all of these people I was talking to in the pub said that the people that they'd spoken to that had dealt with, and this is where David comes in actually a little bit more. The people that they'd met, some of these people, and one of the things that they were obsessed with was ultraterrestrials, and that's another thing that's not come up yet in terms of the Order of Nine Angles. Not really, because I've been, like I said, I've read their book Naos, whatever it's called. I read the Star Game book. I've read a few of David Myatt's books just because I want to sort of know my stuff a bit more when it comes to them. But there's no mention that I can really see of ultra-terrestrials in there at all.
No,
so what's really interesting is why is this crossing over? Why is it? that's a strange.
Well, have you noticed that that's crossing over a lot? Like again, we were talking about things that we never thought would make the mainstream, like the Collins Elite. The other thing I thought would never make the mainstream is now I'm hearing people talk about ultra-terrestrials.
Yeah. But it's weird. It's there aren't that many. I mean, this is. David will probably know this. Because I'm kind of interested in that now because I need to now look into that a bit more. So the books I can think of that kind of cover ultra-terrestrials are obviously Passport to Magonia and Valet's writings. Keel wrote about it, and then to a degree Alan Greenfield wrote about it. With Euphonauts and even in his new book actually as well. But is there a kind of tradition of ultra-terrestrial writing that I'm missing out on? Because they're the only real keystone books I can find.
Are you familiar with Mac Tony's book?
Yeah. Cryptoterrestrials.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I've got that. I literally downloaded that earlier today on Audible. Yeah, so we listened to that today.
Yeah, that one kind of encapsulates it. I mean, it's something that's drifted around from the very beginning. I mean, you think like the Shaver mysteries, right? Like are essential. Have that element to it. I think where it's become big now is because Hal Puthoff had done a kind of speculative paper, just kind of a literature review, really, about that idea. And it became kind of mythologized as the new UFO stuff came out. I think he mentioned it somewhere. Somebody mentioned that he'd written it. It became sort of this like, ooh, there's this scientific report on ultraterrestrials, but it was really it was him doing a lit review. And that's been published, and I think that got the conversation started again. And also the fact that some of the current sightings have to do with the idea of transmedium movement of UFOs, so into the water, and what would that mean? Is that like an off-world thing that has an underwater base, or is that something that's from here? So there's, and there's a lot of stuff. Gary Nolan at Stanford, when he was doing the genetic testing on experiencers, or I don't even know, some of the neurological tests and stuff like that. So there's some like science that's going into the idea of, the potential for breakaway civilizations of, whether, ultra-terrestrials, but is that like, are there really smart Neanderthals that went underground during a cataclysm and like ended up inventing UFOs or something, that it's all kind of open to perspective. And I think some of that too, it goes into the later day psychic studies of looking at genetics. So Institute of Noetic Science had I don't know if they've closed the research yet, but they were doing a research program on familial links with psychic experiences. So if there's kind of a lineage, and that kind of idea that has been around for a long time, like Eileen Garrett's teacher had actually talked to her and has a book which mentions the idea that the witch trials were actually killing off psychics, and that like the psychic bloodline. And then there's sort of rumors about when talking to the Soviet scientists that were looking into psychics, they had a joke about how, well, we didn't kill our shamans and our witches, like the English and like the Europeans and Americans like all killed their witches, but we didn't, so we still have it. So that's sort of a mythos. And then where does that go to, right? Then you have, and that's the bloodline stuff, right? So that's in the conspiracy thing too, this idea of a bloodline. But then you tie that to UFOs and you get the possibility of offshoot races and that kind of thing. So, and in the ultra-terrestrial thing, I mean, if you look at the UFO reports over time and you actually kind of like absorb that literature and that research, they're crazy, and they don't sound like things that would be coming from outer space. It's not like any kind of like coordinated, this is the races that you see coming from outer space, this is what the aliens look like. I mean, this stuff's insane. These reports, especially like 1973 year of the humanoids, those humanoid reports are crazy. So yeah, just, it's kind of drifted around. And and again, I think it goes back to marketing though. I really think it goes back to marketing where, so much of the occult culture is based on like getting high off ideas, and it's the aesthetics and it's lifestyle branding. And once you burn out, like on one aspect of a lifestyle brand, you got to put new stuff in there, so you got to put new color.
I noticed the kind of mainstream UFO community of what little I know of it they don't seem to talk about it very often. It doesn't seem to be a talk point.
No, but it's coming up. It's like it's like music, dude. It's like there's always like a small niche market of underground stuff that's the cool of the cool, and then that gets mined. Eventually, that gets mined by the record industry and the literary industry, all of them, like the movie industry, the whole entertainment complex, which I include news in that mix, is always looking for the next thing to spin as a cycle. And eventually, no matter what subculture you're in and how niche you are, you're gonna get spun. It's gonna happen.
Ultraterrestrials are the new grunge, then, in other words.
Yeah, I refer to him as Cryptoterrestrials, just out of reverence to Mac Tony's in his memory. But it's so funny. Almost with the exception of the 9-angle stuff, everything we've been talking about today is all the stuff I'm writing about in my book right now. So that's cool. I point out that my introduction to Ultraterrestrials was working with Enochian and reading about Dee and Kelly's experience talking to the angels, which if you read what those angels are saying, they don't sound like angels. Right. Even when they're asked directly, like in my work with Enochian, I asked them directly, like, am I talking to an emissary of Yahweh? Are you an angel? Well, yeah, you could call us that, but we're also something else. Like, they're always so evasive, and kind of quirky and weird. It's like as many people has pointed out that seems to be on purpose. Like George Hansen talks about it, Bob Wilson used to talk about it. It's like that seems like a tactic to keep you off balance, to never let you pin them down, because they're going to change. Like tomorrow, the gray alien is not going to be the thing anymore. Tomorrow it's going to be something else, and they're going to be that thing too. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were the thing that lived in the cave that spoke to you. They were the they were the Fae. They were the Mother Mary. They were everything. Like they've always been
chiefs, that sort of thing.
Secret chiefs, whatever they needed to be. And so I've been unpacking that. So I'm sorry I keep bringing that up, but I've been unpacking all this a lot lately and writing my book. So it's really, again, it gets back to the ritual thing. It's about when you're working with something that you mine from the subconscious, you're working with something that has rubbed up against the archetypes. And so, of course, it's going to change shape because the archetypes aren't the same. Not for me as for you, Like there are general universal archetypes that fall under different umbrellas, but I have personal archetypes, which you don't have. Mm-hmm. You have personal archetypes that I don't have, that work for you that don't work for me, and vice versa, right? So we're dealing with an intelligence that has an ability to create some sort of link with your subconscious, and then it's being created by you, or it's some sort of co-creation that's going on, which I think that's probably more like it. So this intelligence lives outside of form, and then it only takes on form when it needs to talk to you, because you're a dumb human and you need form. Mm-hmm. You need to see something talking to you. You need to have a form to project on it. It's like
reminds me a bit of the Indrid Cold story. The John.
Absolutely.
Gill. Yeah.
Great example. Great example.
Yeah. It's kind of like because he appears it appears that different writers had met Indrid Cold, and every time he appeared differently, didn't he, to different people? And so like he was like a 50s, like cheesy looking 50s guy, wasn't he? When was it? Yeah. Was it Darren Wood? I can't remember what's his name. Woody Derenberger, is that his name? The original?
Yeah. That's him. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think
his daughter claims to be talking to them too now.
Yeah, have you read her books?
Yeah, it's horrible. I couldn't get through it.
I finished it. I managed to drag my soul through that book, and it was oh my god.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
you did it for us, Ken. You did it for us.
Yeah, I mean his book's not great, but her book's wow. Was it called like Visitors from Lanulus or something like that?
It's nothing about Lanulus. Yeah. It was horrible.
Yeah, it was terrible. It's like I mean, wow. That book's like.
But I was talking to Sequoia Kennedy the other day. They do the podcast, the Nonsense Bazaar. Mm-hmm. If you don't listen to it, you should.
I know that the female. Willow Truman. Yeah. She definitely listens to this show and sitting now.
So. Oh, cool. Yeah. So, I was telling they did a thing about this book. I don't even remember the name of it, but the other day, so I was talking to him about it, and I said I really, really, really mostly appreciate this weird self-published stuff that maybe sold 50 copies, because the people that write that, like, it's written with passion, like. Mm-hmm. They really, really believe what they're saying. They really want to get something across, and there's no editorial oversight, which makes it crazy, but makes it interesting. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, it's like outsider art almost, isn't it? It's kind of
it is outsider. I view it as outsider art. Yeah.
Yeah,
so the Lanulos stuff, like I just couldn't get through her book for some reason. Her language was just killing me.
But yeah, the ultra-terrestrial thing. Do you think? What are your actual opinions on it, David? Would you say what do you put much stock in that version of the UFO myth? I suppose.
I mean, I think that it can veer into the like flesh and bone, if there's nuts and bolts, like I don't know if I'm comfortable thinking that there's goblins living under the earth that ride UFOs, and I don't think that necessarily fits with the experiences. The idea that there could be other intelligences that exist within on the earth that we interact with, yeah, absolutely, but the idea of kind of like deep cave dwelling UFO riding creatures of some sort, some kind of humanoid, that seems like there'd be a bit more evidence for it. My friend Josh Cutchin writes a lot on weird Bigfoot, and when you get into like the sort of the actual experience reports of Bigfoot or Sasquatch or any kind of like hominid, cryptoterrestrial hominid kind of thing, they get weird quick. And groups like the Bigfoot Research Organization, whatever that the VR, whatever the acronym for it is, but the major one, they actually sort of scrape those cases out or like de-weird them before they investigate or before they're reported. And a lot of the UFO stuff is the same way, where it gets de-weirded. Bud Hopkins is well known for having changed abduction reports or edited stuff out that got a little too out there or not what he thought should be in it, and when it comes into the conversation now, it seems like if I'm looking for grant money to look at UFOs, and I know that UFOs are becoming a serious subject, crash materials, which we've seen come up, that becomes something to focus on, because you can actually go get crash materials, right? Like you have something you can test. And so when you're pitching a research proposal, hey, here's an X crash site, I want to go test it. That's something that's really easy to pitch, versus there's this amorphous thing that some people see, some people don't, and we want to go search for it. You've got no research proposal there. And I think the ultra-terrestrial thing kind of fits into that, like, oh, well, we think UFOs are, goblins that live under the ocean. Like, okay, well, we can take a submarine down and look for goblins. I mean, you can get fun, even if that sounds wild. They funded Yeti hunting trips, right? So as long as you have something physical to look for, and an ultra-terrestrial is a hell of a lot easier to pitch than, So I don't know that the flesh and blood thing really fits with the reports necessarily as a total, especially now when you go back to the beginning of even just 1947 and up, or 1946 and up. And then I think that on the other end, it makes a really nice kind of encapsulation that can be presented as a research proposal.
I think it's interesting. It always interests me because I think we maybe spoke about this before, but the occult world and the paranormal world always used to sort of be mutually exclusive, didn't they? There would always be like the paranormal kind of researchers would, I don't know, they just weren't interested in the occult, and the occult was always trying to be almost viewed as a science, so it didn't want to be, oh, it's not spooky paranormal stuff, and that's where kind of Greenfield got in trouble originally, and all this kind of stuff. But it is interesting to see these two worlds starting to come back together again now a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like
that hadn't been the case, right? Like Borderland Research Associates and stuff, like they weren't Borderland Sciences. They were totally mixing and matching and bridging the two worlds, and like comfortably doing so. And even Ray Palmer, like Ray Palmer, if you look at the old ads in like Fate magazine and Flying Saucer magazine and stuff, was totally selling occult stuff and providing ad space for the AMORC and for all sorts of stuff. Yogi publications, right? Like they were selling books in Palmer Publications while also publishing stuff like Frederick Codd's crystal gazing book and stuff. So it's it's really interesting to see it kind of swing back around, and sort of come back together.
Yeah.
They, even within the in some of the more like I guess obscure, I don't know what the right word is, but something like the French Martinists and that, there were French Martinists that were heavily involved in the parapsychology scene in the 50s, and that they actually ended up leaving not because they didn't think that, not because of the discomfort with being called paranormal or anything like that, but more that they saw the parapsychologists failing to follow through with their results. Whereas, if you're actually a practitioner of any sort, though the goals aren't the same, it's not just to induce phenomena, but to go past phenomena. So, that had led to some issues in the past. But there's actually some fairly noted Martinists that were involved with the Parapsychological Association in the 20th century.
Yeah, interesting.
Well, pre-Newton, there wasn't this bifurcation between science and the occult. They were one and the same. I mean, people forget that Dee was responsible for taking Euclid from the proper Latin and putting it into the Vulgate.
Yeah,
that was Dee that did that. Dee came up with the mathematics to do maritime navigation that allowed the English fleet to defeat the Spanish Armada. This was Dee, the guy who was talking to angels.
Yeah, it's funny. But the sad sort of thing about it was that you think all these kind of occultists, especially within the sort of Western esoteric tradition, I suppose you'd call it, ceremonial magic tradition, because they pushed all that to one side for such a long time, you kind of pushed a lot of the interesting stuff into the fringes. So obviously Kenneth Grant was a great example of that. He was kind of ostracized for a long time, and but it makes me wonder how many of interesting kind of little occult groups that do we not know about that are kind of, we're looking at this stuff, but it's kind of, it feels like there's a lost tribe almost of occultists possibly out there that were kind of really interested in crossing over. In fact, there's another podcast that I talked to, the one-on-one podcast, and one of the guys that's on that is a guy called Mario. He has a YouTube channel called Symbolic Studies, and he found this book recently called Polaria. Have you ever heard of Polaria?
Why have I heard of it?
Yeah, it's it's almost like a lot of people thought it was a Kenneth Grant pseudonym for a long time, but it's actually not.
Oh yeah. Okay, yeah.
So it's kind of like a Lovecrafty kind of occult book. And it turns out it actually isn't Kenneth Grant, and we've found the author, and we're interviewing him either this week or next week.
Oh, cool.
But yeah, I'm kind of really interested in the moment and unearthing these kind of more kind of crossover occult groups, because they're or occult writers at least. Because they do exist, they're out there, but they're always pushed to the fringes by your more serious, crony types. And but it makes me wonder, did that actually devolve that kind of conversation a bit more? By sort of pushing it to one side and trying to be kind of more, I guess, I don't know, taken a bit more seriously. They seem to have actually thrown the baby out with the bathwater a bit, and potentially we've lost a load of really interesting writing.
Well, I know from experience that attitude will cause you to get pushed to the side, even if you do. A great example. I had some great results working with this thing I invented called the meta machine. And when I tried to talk to people about it in computing, like traditional computing, they're like, "Wait, you were doing Barosian cut-ups and what?" Nobody wanted to talk to me about it. So I actually had to take components out of it, rebrand it in 2004, and started my company Media Trust, which was doing decision engine stuff, all using the same technology that I developed for the meta machine, but I had to rebrand it. I couldn't have it anywhere connected to any of that stuff I was doing because it had occult significance and William S. Burroughs cut up stuff, and nobody wanted to talk to me when it was about that. Nobody wanted to look at the results. But if I took the components out and put some shitty branding on them that made them sound like they came out of Silicon Valley, and then put them back into the market, and people were eating it up.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's weird. The good thing, I guess, about a lot of this stuff. Well, it has two sides because we were talking a bit about this last week as well. I think it's interesting that all this stuff's coming a bit more into the public discourse again at the moment, like kind of occult stuff and UFO stuff, but at the same time, it has a kind of a dark side to it as well, which is the satanic panics. Definitely, it feels like that's on its way back in at the moment in a big, big way. And now, because of the things like the internet, things like the Order of Nine Angles, we've got actual like crimes being committed by people identifying as Satanists, and it feels like it's a little bit different this time around. And they've actually got things. Look, there it is. There's the actual thing. That's the Satanist there. It feels like that's a lot more scary at the moment.
Well, I think unfortunately, when you have a rise in certain types of, there's a lot of uncertainty in the world. People have been talking about like, oh, is Putin going to drop the bomb? Like, is China going to invade Taiwan? Is there going to be a war between Iran and Israel? Like when those things are happening, and they're happening all over right now, people start searching for meaning and start grasping at certainty. And unfortunately, religion is a tool for that. In a lot of ways, I think it's a trap that's set up for people that are in those situations. Like, no, we have all the answers. Come to us. We've got it. We've got you covered. You don't have to think anymore. We'll think for you. And this is when that happens. Like the thing that comes up is like, ooh, well, Satan's on the rise, and then you get the satanic panic crap all over again. It happened in the 80s, but it wasn't the first time it happened.
No, yeah.
It's like it has happened a lot.
Yeah.
Over thousands of years.
Yeah. Well, and that's the occult revivals are the same way. People are like, ooh, it's an occult revival. And it's like, wow, okay, that's like 10 years. I mean, look at just the publications. You can see these like this cyclical kind of like rise and fall of it. And people don't remember like the healing revival stuff that happened in the 40s.
Yeah.
Like nobody remembers that because it doesn't fit in with the kind of like repeated history of things. But the healing revival was huge. And right next to the healing revival was exorcisms and fear of demonization and that. And it all appears in the news, but nobody's reading news from, the 1940s, right? Like we're not, unless it's brought up in some kind of, like factoid kind of thing. Like nobody's actually going back and reading the news. That was something I found looking at the stuff with like the UFO topic. If you actually look at the material from each time period, like it doesn't put together a cohesive narrative that people would want, but it puts together a really interesting narrative of experiences with this kind of other, right? Like whatever things, whatever this thing is that people are interacting with. There is a cohesion to that experiential level. There's not a narrative cohesion of aliens are visiting us for whatever reason, or even ultraterrestrials are crawling out of the bowels of the earth to like, do whatever they do, harvest our genes or something. So it's really interesting to kind of look at that. And the same thing with like the satanic panics and that kind of thing. It's these cyclical movements, like you're saying, Joe, with tensions. People are off-putting when you're training a dog. One of the things you learn is that they will redirect their energy if they know that they're not supposed to do something, but they still want to do it, right? So like when you get home and the dog's really excited to see you, sometimes it will turn to a toy and just start like going crazy on the toy. Redirect because it has so much energy and it just wants to leap on you and lick you and like go all over. Knows not to do that, so it'll turn to the toy and redirect the energy. And the satanic panic, these kind of things, it's kind of the human response. That's the toy that we grab and start shaking, when we get too excited because there's a nuclear threat or massive wealth gap or whatever other issue, climate change.
And it never bodes well for us lot.
No, we always get stuck in the middle. And the other thing that dawned on me the other day, which I'm just going to throw this out there, is tent revivals were often in the back pocket of carnies.
Yeah.
So a carnival would show up and they would see like, oh, these people are not the people that we're going to be able to fleece with the games. let's do a tent revival. And they'd take the tent, they'd throw it up, they'd pick somebody, you're the preacher, you're the healer. And then they would do a tent revival. And they would be successful.
But, this is something I'm doing an upcoming talk on horror hosts in the 20th century as like initiatory figures. And this was something that I realized when I was looking at all that stuff, is that one of the weird things about our conversation now, like just kind of like a global conversation, is we've lost the vaudeville tradition, the carney tradition, these traditions that directly influenced music culture and entertainment culture for the majority of human history, right? Like people love bluegrass music, and it's this sophisticated, it's bluegrass, and we have bluegrass everything. Bluegrass was literally the guys that were playing for the sideshow, right? Like they were for the medicine shows. They were the thing that attracted people to come in. Like the history of popular music is people playing to attract people to buy patent medicines. So it's like, but we've forgotten that. Like that's totally been obscured and forgotten. And those skills that they had and that understanding of that has been forgotten, but it's effective. So it keeps getting rediscovered, as kind of the thing. Like like you're saying, Joe, the tent revival being the kind of second tier, the thing you've got in your back pocket if they don't want the carnival, if we look at, like we were talking about earlier with Christian marketing, right? Like that's exactly what they're doing. It's like, here's the candy, or you don't want the candy. Like here's the other thing,
Yeah, it's
well, and that's how AM radio got its start. Was like, especially those just south of the border stations that would go just over the Texas border into Mexico, so they could bypass the wattage laws for the United States. It's like that was all tent revival stuff that was happening on the radio station. There was the bluegrass music, gospel, and then healing. It was all happening on the radio. That's what started AM radio. Yeah. Was that stuff.